poetry and say, what do we need this stuff for?
Meet Mrs. Mary Stein. Mrs. Stein has been teaching around the world for over 40 years. Her passion for literature, especially poetry, has allowed her to meet students from all over the world, including students in Taiwan, Venezuela, Greece, among others. On Friday, February 20th, Mrs. Stein visited KIS to enlighten the high school student body.
Before the presentation, she sat down with us for an interview.
Poetry has been used forever to teach people what they need to know, because rhyme and meter, language with a beat, helps you remember things. If you get the line wrong, you'll hear it's wrong.
Stein had an uncanny ability to bring poetry into life, as she brought student participants up on stage to feel the rhythm and rhyme of poetry.
This is the place where Mrs. Stein gave her presentation about poetry to KIS students. So, KIS sophomores, juniors, and seniors sat in these very seats and listened to her presentation about poetry.
Going through the poems of Robert Frost, Henry Longfellow, and Emily Dickinson, Mrs. Stein introduced a higher form of expression, which to many KIS students sounded foreign at first.
Men came to tell it what was wrong.
We were able to sit down with Susan Park, a sophomore who stayed after the presentation to ask questions to Mrs. Stein.
Even during the presentation, Mrs. Stein introduced all these new kind of different rhythms that we should be able to see in a poem, right? After that, it kind of got easier to understand the poem itself.
Learning was not limited to the students. Many adults in the audience picked up some things from the presentation as well.
Yeah, I mean, Mrs. Stein, she is obviously a very well-regarded teacher, and she's also somebody who knows a lot about the particular subject. So you guys learn things, but I learned things as well. So in that respect, as a lifelong learner, it was important for me to be able to participate in this too.
Clearly, her love for poetry resonated across to the audience. So what is it about this art form that she loves so much?
Aspects of poetry. One final thing. Robert Frost said, "The heart sinks when robbed of the chance to discover for itself what a poem is all about." So I never teach poetry, really. I teach the process by which my students can go out and understand poems for themselves.
And she has done just that. Many KIS students, like Susan Park, have already started pursuing higher knowledge of poetry, and will continue to do so thanks to Mrs. Stein's efforts. Reporting for the Phoenix Plume, Patrick Nam, Eeho Choi, and Sophia Lee.